Welcome back, csc121 to ex24 QBText. And it's part 2 of the video, and we only have like 4 lines of code here. But we're going to do a little bit more here. One thing I just want to point out as well, when we print it out, in here I'm printing out the I, I'm printing out each item after we split them. But when we printed out the list, we printed out QB list here, and I think I did this the first time, and then I ran through it. And it printed out this whole list. And what it did is it looped through and it printed out 34 lists. So each one of these is a separate list. Now, I just want to point out that if you move this back, you might say, well, I want to, because I remember when I was first doing it, I was like, I want to print out the whole list. Now, if I print this at the end, and I'll make sure I clear this first, it just prints out 1. And I was confused because I was like, well, why is it just printing out 1? And what's happening here is it is actually going through, it's splitting the list, but then it's not looping the printing. So it's just printing this one time here. So I just want to point out that that's why that's in there as part of the loop. Now I'm going to get rid of this right now because we're going to put something else in here. And what I'm going to do now is we're just going to do a little output statement, and I'll just make a variable called output. We're just going to make an F string. Now, a lot of times we print out F strings, but here we can just start it with F. And remember, with F, it has to be with a string. So we got to make sure you put a string here. And I'll put my string, and then in here, what I'm going to do, and you can do this anyway, but I'll put a space here. I'll put these curly braces, because you remember with F strings, what goes in here are variables. So we're going to put variables in here, and you might say, well, what variable am I going to use? Well, we have a variable called QBList. Luckily, I left this up here. I didn't intend to, but it's up here. Now remember, as far as a list goes, this is index 0. This is index 1. This is index 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And we're actually going to use 0, 1, 3, because that's the team. They're all quarterbacks. We're going to use that one. And then we're just going to use passing yardage. And that's the one I always knew from football and stuff. So we're going to use passing yardage. So we're going to use 4 of these. That's why we have 4 of these here. And we have nothing in there. So if you're wondering why those wavy lines, is because we don't have anything in here. And what we could put in here, so I'll shorten this up a little bit so we can stretch this out. And I'm going to go in here, I'm going to put QB list. Remember, that's our variable that represents the list. And we're going to use square brackets in here. So we have curly brackets for each variable in an F string. And then we have square brackets, which is going to be the index number. So I'm going to use a 0 in here. And then I'll just copy this so I don't have to type it again. And on this one, I'll put a 1, because that'll be their last name and first name. And then I'll paste this one here. This will be 3. This will be their team, or the abbreviation, 3-letter abbreviation of their team. And then the last one will be the yards. And actually, I put that in the wrong one. This will go here. And this one will be 6. That'll be index number 6. So remember, these are the index numbers from each list. So we could print them out, and that's going to be our output. Now, if I went to run it, I could clear this here, and I could run it. Nothing's going to happen because we don't have a print statement. So we have to put a print statement in here, and I'll stretch this out so it looks okay. And we're just going to print out output, print output, and that should print that out. And if you run it, there's our output. And we don't know how many that are here. I mean, we know there's 34 altogether, but if we wanted to count these, we could still do a counter, and I'm going to throw a counter in here because not only are we going to use a counter to count them, but we'll also use a counter to kind of number them in the front. So I'm going to create a number here, and I'll just say num equals, and I guess I'll start it off with 0 for now, and that could be outside the loop. And then what's going to happen here is every time I do this, I could increment the number. I could say num plus or equals 1. You could even print it out if you wanted to. If you wanted to say print num, just try that out and see what happens so far. And that way we have 2 print statements. We're going to print out output, and we're going to print out a number. So let's just see what happens here. So I'm going to run that, and you can see what's happening. It's doing the item, then the number, and actually you might not be able to see that, so let me clear it and run it again. It's doing the quarterback there. It's doing his first name, last name, his city, and his yards passing. And then it's putting the number. And it should be 34 at the bottom. But what would be nice is to have the number next to these. And in addition to counting these, like we could even put something at the end. We don't even have to print num. We could do something like this and move this out, total or something like that. And we could put a comma in here. We could do something like that so you could run it And let me clear it again. And then at the bottom, it can say total 34. And then however many you do, you can have a different number show up. Now, the nice thing about this too is I told you we can't just put it in range here and put a number because it messes up our split. So not only can we use the number to just get a total, but we can even use the number to actually stop this at a certain amount. And if you remember how to do that, that would be a break statement. And we have to do that in a for loop. We have a for loop, so a break statement would break this loop at as many as we want. So we don't have to go in here and put for I in 10 or anything like that, or range of 10. Since we can't do that with that file, this is another way we can actually stop it at a certain amount. For example, we could do this if num equals 10 or something. Let's say we just wanted 10 of them. I could say if num equals 10, and then I could just do a break statement, and then that should stop it. And if I run it, it's saying total 10. Now, that's nice that it is counting for us and it's doing that. So that's one way that it's actually, we're actually, instead of counting them here, since we can't do it, we can do it that way. And another thing we can do too, since we have this variable called num, we can put the num in front of it. Let's say we just wanted to number these. Instead of doing that, we can get rid of this if we don't want that. We could put a num in front of here. I could put one more empty curly brace here and just put num, and then after the variable, because it's just going to show a number, I could put like a colon and a space, because remember, that's part of the string. So you can have a colon and a space in there. That'll just be in between the variables. So that way I can have a number, or even just actually maybe a dot would look better. I'm not sure what would look better. I think when I did it, I put a colon, or you could put a dot in there right after the number, and then a dot and a space. So it's using num. So then if you ran this, it's doing, well, we don't want it to start at 0. It's going 0 through 9. You fix that easy. Just go here, make that a 1 so that it starts at 1. And then wherever you want to end, just add one more to it. So you can end one more here. So if you wanted 10 here, you would just start at 1 and you would break it at 11. And now we have 1 through 10. So any number you want to put in here, you just have to change the number that's down here. If you want to print out 16, you want to print out 15 of them, just put 16 here. And there it is. There's the top 15. Now, we can't sort these right now because it's a text file. We don't have the ability to go through and sort this. We're not able to do that right now. It's not like working through a database or anything like that. So we can't do that. Now, the one last thing we're going to do here on part 2 is take this information and let's just do this. Let's do 20. We'll do 21. So we'll get 20 of them. We'll do this, and I'll ask you to do that. We're going to output this to a separate file. Now, we don't have a separate file. We only have QBText. Now, you can append to that and alter that, but I don't want to mess with that. I'm going to make a new file. And you don't even have to make a new file. That's the nice thing about this, is we can just make a new file kind of on the fly, and we're going to use something called W, and it's going to write. And if you try to write to a file that doesn't exist, it'll create one for you. So here's what we're going to do here. And I'll clear this out, and this will be the last thing for this assignment, is you can highlight this whole line because it's going to be the same thing. Now, even this next line has to be indented, so that means everything else is going to be indented. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to hit return, and I'm going to paste it right here. And you can see this is getting wavy lines. So if you highlight all of this and hit your tab key, it'll bump everything over, and everything will be indented. And what we're going to do here is we're going to open, except we're going to make a new file. Now, we're just going to call it QBout, because it'll be a new file called QBout. We have data, and then we'll call this QBout. You could call it output, whatever you want, but I'll just call it QBout right now. And that's going to be our new file that we're going to create. And instead of reading it, because we don't have it yet, we're going to put a W because we're going to write. And then also this variable has to change too. So don't forget to change this, and I'll just call the variable QBout. It can be the same name as the text file, I believe. I don't think that should be a problem. So I'm going to call that QBout, and the file is QBout. Now, what we have to do is tell it to write to a new file. Now we're outputting here, and we could go right at the end here, I believe. I think before we break this, what we're going to do here is we're going to use this QBout, and we're going to say .write, because now we're going to write to a file. And just like we can read, we had read before, we used read, we're going to write. What we're going to write here is going to be the output. So we're going to write that output text. So we're going to be writing the text that we're printing out here. So we're going to do two things. We're going to print it out here, but then we're also going to write it to a new file in this QBout part. So I think this should be okay to have it right here. So we'll see what happens here. I'm going to clear this out. I'll move this over so everything looks nice. and I'll run it, see if I get any errors, and that's the output. Now what we actually want to do is we want to have a new file get created, and as long as we have this created, and we called that QBout, and we made that a new file, we made that W. If we did this all correct, we should have a new file over here, and we don't. But that's okay, because it doesn't show up right away if you refresh this. And even if it says, you know, you might lose, you're not going to lose anything. Look at that. It created a new file for us called qbout.txt, and there's all the information of our 20 quarterbacks. Now, they don't look very good because it's all kind of jammed together, but we can fix that. We can go back here, and what we can do is, I'll spread this out, is we could just go to the end here, right inside where the quote is, right inside of the double quote, we could just do a backspace N and put a line break there, or a new line character, and that way every time it does that, it'll make a new line character, so when it writes it back to that file, it won't be all kind of jammed together. So let's just run it one more time. It should rewrite right over it, because we're not using append, so it should rewrite that. So if we go here, it should update, and there it is. Look how nice that looks. So that's all you need for this assignment. So you should have your original QB data text, then you should have this QBout text, and it should look like that when you're done. And your main py file, it's not a lot of code at all. It's just going to have a with open, and it's going to open the original data file and write it, and it's going to have a variable here. And then also inside there, we're going to open another file. This is the last thing we'll do, will be the QBout file, and we're going to write that one. And we have a number that we're starting at 1. We're doing a loop here. We're looping through the file, the original file. We're splitting it up into a list, and then we're just outputting the data from the list using the index numbers, and then we're just printing the output we get from that, and we're incrementing our numbers, and then finally we threw this in here to write to a new file. So we're writing to the QBout file, and this is the content that we're putting in there. And finally we put in an if statement to break it, so that if we wanted to limit how many of these we did, because normally it'll just go through the whole, it'll go through as many lines that are in QB file that it can find. Here we could break it at a certain point if we want. So that's all we have to do for EX24. I'm going to put this in your Replit classroom so you could submit it from there, and I'll have some instructions over on the right side. And that's all you have to do for this. We're going to be doing some more with some files to try and make things some more relevant as we start kind of working with data a little bit more.